So Dr. Katja Geißler is a prestigious researcher from Germany. And that's my introduction. Sorry, she studied somewhere, she got a master, she got a PhD. I can confirm that. I don't know exactly where. And Katja, if you are ready, you can share your screen and you can start your presentation. And her topic is the effects of wildlife on soil resource availability.
All right. Thank you very much, Ebert, for the introduction. You're expecting Katja. I'm not Katja, unfortunately. My name is Niels Blaum, and I'm going to replace Katja because her father passed away last night. So she's not able to speak today. I hope that you can hear me well. Can you maybe quickly give me a sign?
Yes, we hear you very well. Thank you, Niels.
Okay. All right. Excellent. So as Ebert already introduced, Katja prepared a talk on the effects of wildlife on soil moisture and resource availability, and she will provide some insights from field measurements. She did this study together with colleagues from UNAM and NAST, Rosemary, Shikangala, Angula Ngongo, Ben Mapani, Shupala Ngulu. I was also involved a little bit in it, and it was part of the Oryx project that was finalized last year. Now let me see whether I can continue with my slide. Yeah, just to give you an idea how Katja looks like for those that do not know her. Can you see my laser pointer in the slide? This is Katja at one of our stakeholder workshops 3 years ago. All right. I will continue a little bit in the direction that Ivo was speaking just now, and he actually really paved the way to some insights that I will share on behalf of Katja. In Namibia, but also in other countries in Southern Africa, there's a current shift from land users from livestock to wildlife-based management. So they are going back to wildlife-based options, actually. And there are two major differences in both approaches. In livestock production, beef production mainly, animals are regularly moved between different camps, and you usually have mostly or only grazing, particularly if you focus on cattle production. In free-ranging wildlife, there are no fences. It's a huger area of a farmland. There's no rotational management, so they roam freely. And they do both. They graze, they browse, and many of the species are mixed feeders. So there's a high diversity in the way they interact with the vegetation and the landscape. There are many potential benefits that are discussed and already proven partly that wildlife management has the potential to counteract land degradation. For some reason, I see. Do you see my slide on wildlife-based management? It looks that you present something completely different on the screen. What slide are you seeing currently?
We're seeing the one that says current shift from livestock to wildlife-based management.
Wonderful, wonderful. Then everything's perfect. So, all right. The additional support benefits are increased biodiversity and improved ecosystem functional through soil health and so on. Slide, please. But there are important interactions between animals and the soil. It is clear that many animals, if not all, feed, or at least herbivores feed on plants. They change the architecture of plants and they can modify the resource availability for plants. They do this directly through soil nutrients, through their dung, and they also do this indirectly when modifying soil moisture that helps actually to distribute the nutrients into the soil. Trampling effects, either cattle or wildlife, they change the soil structure. A heavily compacted soil, as you can see here on the right side, is characterized by low space between the different particles. So there's no air basically between the particles, which hinders soil water infiltration and also distribution of nutrients. So we often observed along compacted soils situations a reduced infiltration of rainwater and a reduced mobility of water molecules. On the right-hand side, you see the relationship between soil compaction caused by trampling and soil moisture on the y-axis, and this proves this relationship. More soil compaction results in a decreased soil moisture availability. The key questions of her research was, first, what are the effects of endemic wildlife activity on soil nutrients for plants and soil compaction? And the second question that I'm presenting today is, what is the effect of soil compaction on plant root water uptake? So how do plants actually explore the available water in the soil? The study area was in the western Etosha region at a private protected area called Etosha Heights. It is southwest of Etosha National Park. You can see it here in this red square, but Etosha Heights actually is somewhere here, just bordering the national park. It's a semi-arid tree and shrub savanna. Mean annual precipitation is 300 millimeter, and it's mainly a loamy, sandy soil type. In Oryx, in this project, we colored wildlife, springbok, kudu, and eland, to explore the impacts of their movements, their interactions with vegetation. And one part of this project looked at the activity centers of these wildlife species. And an activity center is a center that we defined as an area where individuals rest for a longer time, where they usually also leave their feces, and areas where they feed, where they also often lose their feces when they stay there at this area for more than 1.5 hours. This map that you can see is a movement track. This is 10Ks, this is 5Ks in size, and all these different blue squares indicate such activity centers where there's a longer interaction with the vegetation in the soil. From these centers, they selected 20 random activity centers in the case of springbok, and additionally 20 randomly selected sort of control sites where there was no activity of springbok. What they did in these sites, they did a soil sampling, but they ensured that the soil composition of these control sites and the activity sites was similar in relation to the proportion of sand, clay, and loam. There was a similar plant species composition, and they recorded soil in the rain season or in the vegetation period, and in the drought season where there's basically no activity of the plants. At each of these sites, they took 5 samples, which was lumped together or combined to a composite sample of soils structure between 0 and 40 centimeters. And for these soil samples, they determined the chemical and physical properties to explore nutrient availability for plant growth. This is the results in the vegetation period or in the rain season for the macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium. And you see here always on the right side, the impact of the antelope activity on these soil nutrients, and on the left side, the control. And for all macronutrients, you see there's a higher amount of these macronutrients in the rain season compared to these control sites. If we look at the micronutrients, again, rain season, we see a completely different picture. Here, the control sites in green do have a higher amount of micronutrients compared to these activity sites. All right, so we have lowered micronutrients in the antelope activity sites, but an increase of macronutrients in these activity sites. When we compare this with a dry season, all these values level off. So what it basically means, the activity sites will have the same calcium amount, the same magnesium amount, the same natrium amount, and the same is true for the macronutrients. And this leveling out of values in the drought season over time is an indication for the wildlife activity that they are responsible for this shift in nutrients over time. So this means that in the vegetation period, wildlife can improve the growth conditions for grasses, since compared to the leguminous shrubs, grasses grow mostly nitrogen limited. So we have an increase of nitrogen in these activity areas, and they are less limited by micronutrients. So it's not too much of a problem for perennial grasses if there is few micronutrients in the soil. If we look at the organic matter, we also see higher proportions of organic matter in the activity sites compared to the control sites. And this is also good news because organic matter increases the water holding capacity of the soils, which means soils with a higher proportion of organic matter usually have a higher potential soil moisture. So wildlife activity can improve the water regime also in large areas, not only on a single site. I think this is one of the last results where you can see the impact of the animal activity on soil compaction. And it's also very obvious to see that at all these sites where there is antelope activity, the compaction is very high here, displayed as resistance in kilopascal compared to the control sites. Please note there only 5 sites could be completed for time reasons. This is a weakness here of this comparison. And I think, yes, Katja is showing older results from an earlier project called Optimus, where we used the shrub cover here on this x-axis as a proxy for land use intensity. A very early study that I did in my PhD times. Here I related the large stock units of specific cattle farms to the proportion of shrub cover in southern Kalahari rangelands, and we found a very, very strong relationship between stocking and shrub cover, which made our decision easy that we use shrub cover as a proxy for land use intensity. So what you can see here in these many graphs is again soil compaction in different soil depth. And it is easy to see that we have these higher values here rather in the upper soil compared to the lower soil here. All these values are lower, and the relationship between shrub cover or land use intensity and soil compaction turns around. So there's basically no different relationship compared to here. And the reason for this is that the compaction actually, or not the reason, the conclusion of this is that the compacted soil mostly is in the first 25 centimeter, and all the trampling effects below this soil depth remains very little or even undetected, simply because we have not this increase in soil compaction in the deeper soil layers here. And then Katja and her colleagues related the soil compaction with signs of vegetation water use. And what they did, they used again this shrub cover gradient, and they looked at the drought stress of annual grasses and identified a strong relationship between shrub cover or land use intensity and drought stress, which means that there is a higher drought stress in shrub-dominated areas. Annual plants do root in the upper soil layer, so they are affected by this compacted soil. Perennial grasses, we would have expected actually the same linear pattern as for the annual grasses, but this pattern looks very different. We do not have a good explanation for this different pattern. They do root a bit deeper, perennial grasses, compared to annual ones, but this may only partly explain this sort of negative hump-shaped relationship. Maybe here the lower drought stress can be explained by the deeper rooting, and in the heavily compacted soil, probably they are simply not able to root deeper because of the compaction, but we don't know. All right, to sum this up, and I hope that I'm in time, I've never practiced some sort of a PowerPoint karaoke that I'm doing. Yeah. First, since grasses grow mostly on nitrogen-limited soils, if we compare it to one of the key bush encroachments like Acacia mellifera, for example, and are less limited by micronutrients, wildlife activity can indeed improve the growth conditions for grasses. Second, since the organic matter increases water holding capacity of soils, wildlife activity can also improve landscape water regime. Third, still some caution must be taken into account in terms of balancing, of course, the benefits of wildlife, increasing of the number of wildlife individuals that you put on a farm or on a private reserve or so. It is totally clear that you can easily overstock areas with wildlife as well. And there are, I think, many examples where there's too much wildlife on single farms. I also personally often observe that farms that were turned into wildlife farms often had a very bad condition, which also may lead to the idea that if there's nothing else that you can do, try wildlife. So one must be a little bit careful with changing these plans. In any situation, wildlife, cattle production, high animal numbers, too high animal numbers can lead to degradation of both the soil and the vegetation. All right, I think this was it. There should be a thank you slide. I'm very sure that Katja is thanking all the funding agencies, the ministries that allowed our research on the farms. I can actually switch on my camera. I totally forgot it. I'm sorry. I'm here. And also the contributors in the field. So I hope that you could understand me well, and I hope that I can answer your questions.
Niels, you are fantastic at PowerPoint karaoke.
Yeah, I practice it with my students very often, so I pick up their tricks.
Well done. Questions? We've got a question here from Cornelis.
Yeah, Niels, thank you very much for standing in for Katja, and sorry to hear about her dad. Two questions. The one is, how do you explain the drop in the micro minerals, with the danga? And then the second one, did the soil carbon increase in the wet season? Did it carry over to the dry season? Because you didn't show any data, for carbon, for the dry season.
Yeah. No, I didn't show any data on carbon because I believe it's now a guess that they didn't check for carbon amounts in the soil. So I cannot report on these data. I would need to double check with Katja. If she would have carbon, I believe that she would have presented it. It was at this stage not our focus to look at carbon as a source. So I believe they do not have it. I can double check with Rosemary because she did the soil analysis, but I think they don't have it. And regarding your other question, was it the leveling out? And what was your first question? Sorry.
The micro
the
minerals that
micronutrients
drop, in the where the dung, where the animal activities were concentrated.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a tricky one. We were also thinking and discussing what could be an explanation. One possible explanation can be that these micronutrients are taken up by the plants during the vegetation period, and that there's more regrowth and more germination in these activity areas, and they simply remove these micronutrients. We only have here data that have an observational character. It is not an experiment, so we cannot say this is the cause and this is the response. This is simply, I would say, an observation of what we found there. The next step would indeed be to do manipulative experiments to really say, okay, it is 100% related to the activity, and we need to find out what is actually the explaining process and mechanism that leads to these temporal observations.
Niels, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Frank Bockmüller. I'm a hydrogeologist traveling the whole country. And I think for the general public, it must be stated that Etosha Heights is not a normal game farm. It really shows the impact of nearly naturally occurring game in the area. I think the point 3 in the summary is very important. I fail to see a single game farm in the rest of the country where they've got high value game, where rangeland is not continuously deteriorating. They really, they can't do any rangeland management because high value game, they've got enough money to feed them through all the drought periods. So it's actually, we cannot compare what we've seen there to the rest of the country, the game farms. I think it's very important to take note.
Yeah, I thank you for that comment. I think I mentioned it a little bit in the direction that you were adding to it, that I also observe most wildlife farms that are in a bad situation where what we observed here as a best practice case is not working like this. However, Etosha Heights used to be cattle farms that were merged together, and when they started their business, it was also a hunting farm. So in a way, they started off with a hunting practice like many other wildlife farms as well, and now they turned since a couple of years into a tourism concession which focuses only on safari tourism, let me put it like this. But true, there are not many examples that may be similar to that situation, but I want to share the potential that wildlife can have here. And I think for conservancies, which cover large areas of northwestern, northeastern Namibia, this is also important news, that if they can manage their numbers, the vegetation will benefit from it as well.
Thanks, Niels. So Dr. Katja Geißler is a prestigious researcher from Germany. And that's my introduction. Sorry, she studied somewhere, she got a master's.